All right, there's a brand new Grand Slam champion in women's professional tennis, and her name is Sloan Stephens. Stephens beat out 4 other American women in the semifinals for the U.S. Open crown. We're going to wrap up her breakthrough win, as well as another Grand Slam title for Rafa Nadal, as Prime Sports Tennis with Andrea Leand on PSN starts now. All right, it's September the 12th, 2017. I'm your host, Greg DePalma, and joining me once again, fresh back from the U.S. Open, is PSN tennis analyst and former top 15 player in the world, Andrea Leand. And Andrea, I guess here's a question. Who's the player of the year now?
I go with Venus Williams right now. She's won more Grand Slam matches than any other player on the women's tour, but right now the moment goes to Sloan Stephens. What a magical, magical moment that was for her to earn her first Grand Slam title in just coming back from 11 months off with the foot surgery. But it's been more than that, Greg. It's been a process of 8 years. I remember sitting in the stands in her junior matches 8 years ago, watching her first pro debut at the U.S. Open. And it's been tough. You know, as Sloan herself says, there were ups, there were downs, there was a lot to contend with. This has not been an overnight success story, but she persevered. She showed her resilience. The pieces came together. And what a terrific moment it was to see. We've heard so much about rivalries and so much of the tit for tat with a lot of our top stars. Now to see Sloan and Madison Keys, relatively in the same generation. Madison's a couple years younger, but still embraced after the match, fought their hearts out, did everything they could over the fortnight, but at the end, really provided the moment I think the crowd will always remember.
Yeah, and it was also really nice to see just how close Sloan is with Madison. And, we talked an awful lot. I know you talked a lot really over the last few months and the last 2 weeks about how these girls just strive to win and to go further in these tournaments, especially the big ones, when they can see that their friends, their friendly rivals, how they perform. And so it was a nice, touching moment, and I'm sure it's not the last time we're going to see them two hugging each other and having a great time after a championship win for either. And I'm sure the time will come when Madison will win, and Sloan will be sitting there as the runner-up. It was really nice to see.
Well, it reminded me back when Michael Chang, Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi, and Jim Courier, and everyone was wondering who was going to be the first to win a Grand Slam. And of course, Pete and Andre were had so much more flash and so much more weapons to them that everyone thought they would be the first. And it ended up being Michael Chang, the counterpuncher, the scrambler, the one who dug in and showed the heart and the mind to be able to beat all these big bashers. And to some degree, we have a little bit of that there because Madison Keys obviously has been the protege from the beginning. She was signed with Nike at age 13, went to the Everett Academy, of course, one of the most well-respected academies in the world. As a 10-year-old, was coached by John Everett, who, of course, was Sister Chrissy there to give a little bit of mentorship, provided such an incredible foundation for Madison in her early years, and right up to the point where she went on tour at 17, 18 years old. And the foundation was there. She was able to serve 114 miles an hour when she was only 14. The weapons, the innate, energy in the arm, the power in the arm was always there. That's something you can't teach. But to see her grow and evolve also in a very short period of time since coming back from 2 wrist surgeries and a lot of up and downs herself was quite extraordinary too, with Lindsay Davenport in her corner. But we've seen both women go through a lot, a lot of coaches, a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different training regimens, and they finally seem to find the right program, the right ingredients to pull it together for this fortnight. Because, Greg, that's what this fortnight was about. It was absolutely could not have been more appropriate to have the Final Four in the women's draw All-American. And it was just put such relief and put to bed all the questions about what's going to happen to American tennis when Serena retires. The answer was right there staring us in our face, and it was a great sight to see. But, I remember back when, Madison was at the Everett Academy. Coco, let's mention Coco Vandeweghe in the conversation. She was in the semis. She beat the number 1 player in the world, Pliskova, to get there, and had to play Madison in the semis. Obviously didn't fare as well. But I remember watching, Madison was down at the Everett Academy playing a practice set when she's obviously a lot younger than Coco, who's going to be 26 at the end of the year, but was able to beat Coco in the practice set. And then I remember Coco beating Sloan in the first round of the U.S. Open a few years back. So they've all had their goes at each other on court, but then to see after the match, after that final, where obviously Madison, very disappointed, in tears, didn't really know how to handle the moment, and there was Sloan, and you could see her mouth going. You could just see that as they were hugging, you could see Sloan's mouth going, trying to relax her, trying to calm her down, trying to comfort her. And that was just such a great moment for women's sports, for sports in general, to see that type of camaraderie after such a hard-fought fortnight.
Talk about, because we did the last show before the semis, and this first we'll start off with the Venus Sloan match, because we a lot of people thought that Venus had the edge there, and why not? I mean, she's the wily veteran. She's been there before. Maybe Sloan had gone as far as she was going to go for this particular event, and yet what happened was, as far as what I saw, was Sloan played the match of her life, and that's what it would take in order to beat a player like Venus. She played tremendous.
Sloan had the fight of her life. She showed the fight and the resilience, more so than we've ever seen from Sloan, to endure and prevail in that match. It was a 3-set match, very lopsided in the first 2 sets, 6-1 for Sloan in the first set. Venus was very out of sorts walking onto the court. I could tell she was nervous before the match, and in fact, when she walked on the court, she just did not seem herself to me. It took a long time to get going. And as we've seen now with both Madison and Sloan, and all these players who've had to face Sloan, they don't have a game book on her. She's been out, Greg. She was out for 11 months, and she's come back with a little bit of a different game. It was interesting. She tweeted out pictures of herself when she had we talk about the foot surgery. She was in a boot for 14, 16 weeks. When she came back, she was not able to put pressure on it immediately, had to start hitting off a chair. So she was sitting on a chair, and what that did is that started to simplify her strokes. Her strokes had gotten too convoluted with hitches and twitches and loops and curly cues, and the forehand was too Western. The grip was cocked too far back, and she wasn't really able to take the ball early, take it on the rise, and all the different hitches in the strokes also ended up hurting her when the points got close and the match got tight, and it really accounted for a lot of unforced errors. But when she went back to sitting on this chair, I could actually close my eyes and just listen to how the ball bounced and how when she hit the ball and struck the ball, and it was rhythmic, it was clean, and you could tell that the backswings were more streamlined, no more hitches, and it was all because she had to do it off a chair. So it's interesting how there's always a silver lining to something, and even though she had to go through this horrendous injury, which, by the way, was a lot of starts and stops, finally she had the surgery only after she had gotten to Sydney in January to try and play the Australian, had to come home and have it, and then had to go through this whole rehab in the entire spring. But the silver lining was she actually improved her ground game in her comeback, and her serve is still the weakest part, but she was moving. She wasn't in perfect shape, she said, had a few pounds to lose, but she was willing to go and play her way into shape and just continue to try and put in a full effort. And the other silver lining is no one had a game book on her, even Lindsay. And no one knew how to play her because she's such a great defensive player and can mix up the pace so well that it's hard to get a rhythm with Sloan. It's hard to get a target with Sloan because she's moving all over the place. And she's going to make you play one more ball and have to go for that one more shot. And because she runs so well, you always have one eye on her and one eye on the ball, which accounted for what we saw with Venus, a few unforced errors. The match was Venus's to win in the third set. If she won one of the first 2 games, she probably would have won that set. She was up. She had break point opportunities, did not convert. She was 10 for 24, though, at net, and that was the key stat of the whole match. We talked about Venus in that right arm, and let me tell you, Greg, for her to get through Suarez-Navarro and then Kvitova, which was the third set breaker, was absolutely phenomenal. And I was courtside for both matches, right down there, and the velocity that she had to hit to overtake Suarez-Navarro, who was treeing out of her brain. I mean, I've never seen someone in a zone like her for that second set. But Venus endured and, stood it out with Suarez-Navarro as a talented Spaniard baseliner, but for some reason was just hitting winners off of both wings. And Venus was hitting right with her and finally was able to prevail. And then against Kvitova, Venus could have taken a dive on that one. Kvitova is a Grand Slam champion. She's certainly a formidable opponent. She played well enough. She had just beaten Muguruza, the number one player in the world, as we mentioned this Monday. And so, it would have been perfectly feasible to expect Venus not to beat Kvitova. But I think that Venus in that match realized she really could take it. And even though she knew she was already going to face Sloan in the semis, which is never an easy task when you're the veteran and all the pressure is going to be on you, she went and she took that match with Kvitova, and that was heart and soul. Against Suarez-Navarro, it was hitting, but against Kvitova, it was heart and soul to prevail in that third set breaker. And I think that just took everything she had in that right arm. We could see in the serve against Sloan, she barely could get that ball toss up over her head. The shoulders were just drooping as she tried to swing the racket head through it. And the first serve percentage was never there. The second serve percentage was not any better. But she still was able to play the points, Greg, where she would set it up. And had she been able to stick a few of those volleys, including at 4-all in that third set, 2 points away from the match, 5-4 for her, with Sloan serving. Had she been able to stick a couple of those volleys, she would have won. But again, the wrist was wobbly. She had not really practiced enough on her net game. You could see she probably had not put the same time into the practice as Sloan had. She certainly did not have the match wins going into the U.S. Open as far as just the U.S. Open Series events concerned as Sloan did. We have to remember Sloan was back-to-back semis in two of the biggest events on the tour in the Canadian Open in Cincinnati, semi, whereas Venus had lost to Svitolina in a three-setter, but then lost to Ashley Barty in a not great match in Cincinnati. So it had been a very, not a very kind of queasy preparation for Venus leading into the U.S. Open. And there you could see by the time that semifinal came around, she just was not prepared to finish it off. And you credit Sloan because she really hung in there.
Do you suspect that Venus might have to pull back her schedule a little bit as she's now, of course, she's up there. And this is what, she's getting to a lot of these Grand Slam semifinals and some finals. But, each time, as you've said before, it just seems like she's running out of gas, not maybe mentally, but physically. And so does she need more time off between these big events?
I think so. Let's remember, not only is she 37, she's battled the Sjogren's, so we don't know what the parameters are for her in as far as training off court. But to V, we say you do three things right now. You do the Jimmy Connors workout, the 47-minute workout where you do 10 minutes of ground strokes, 15 minutes of ground strokes. You need to spend 15 minutes at net. You got to get those volleys down. You got to be able to close out those points when you run the opponent around and get the short ball. And then you got to spend some time, hitting those approach shots, hitting the short one, coming in, volley, overhead volley, and getting used to finishing the points because that's her future, Greg. She's not going to be able to sit there and battle with these girls, these younger girls from the baseline, 10 feet behind the baseline. That's not going to work. Obviously, her groundies are great, but she at 37 years of age is just not going to, and be able to endure an entire draw. She's going to have her big win still, but to win the total tournament, she's got to really build up. This is an off-court workout, the upper body and the legs. If she could increase and improve her upper body strength, especially in that right arm, it would help her serve. It would help her as far as enduring these long matches round after round. Also, she could, improve that leg strength and get some leg into that serve. It would take the pressure off the arm. So, those are things. If she can spend a half an hour in the gym every other day on the strengthening, and then a half an hour on every other day doing cardio, and about 47 minutes on court, she's good. That's enough for Venus. She's been around now, 20 years. So she doesn't. She's played the U.S. Open for 20 years, so she doesn't need to put in the hours that both Sloan and Madison do. And we do say to Sloan and Madison, we're not talking about you either. You need to go back and you need to put those hours in, and this is very important to their development. But I think their coaches know it, Greg, and I thought also what was a very memorable moment, and there were so many with Sloan, so many poignant moments. Of course, she played tribute to her mother, and I thought that was just a really terrific thing to do on court to the whole world because her mother, Sybil Smith, deserves all the accolades And I remember, we talked about how Serena's baby was born during the Open. Well, the day Serena's baby was born was the 8-year anniversary of Sloane's father's death. And it happened during the Open in 2009. And I remember Sybil having to get Sloane to the funeral in the South and then back to play juniors, and in a frame of mind where she could be okay with it all. And for Sybil to be able to do this and handle all the sorts of situations of including her Sloane's stepfather, Stephen Smith, who died of a 1.5-year battle of cancer, which was also very demoralizing for Sloane and her brother Sean. Yeah, but Sybil got them through it, and Sybil continued to get them through every single stage of what was a tough thing. I remember Sybil would have to go back to the hotel to teach online courses to make enough money to make ends meet to pay for a lot of this for Sloane, because it costs a lot of money to put a player out there, millions of dollars. And, granted, certainly the USTA contributed and there was support elsewhere, but it still was up to Sybil, because she has that amount of pride in herself to want to pay her own bills and have her own job. And in fact, you know what? She's a doctor now. She's gotten her doctorate. She's a psychologist at school, a school psychologist, and she has a full-time job. So she has a full life. She's not just traveling around with Sloane anymore. But I thought it was great to hear Sloane give her so much credit, because not one time, I can tell you, in the 9 years did I ever hear Sybil say a negative word about Sloane, express any doubt about her, or have any kind of regret. It was always a very positive, very constructive, and proactive approach to helping Sloane pave her way. And it's interesting because, Greg, in the junior girls, there was a 13-year-old, Coco Gauff, who made the finals, and they were talking about the age eligibility rule, because she wants to be able to play a full schedule at 13, and how unfair it is. And they talked about this is just because of the Capriati scenario. And in fact, there were a lot of players where we had an issue with. We had an issue with Capriati and Dokic and, of course, Lucic and Pierce. And so there was a lot of issue about, parents who wanted to push their kids out too soon. But Sybil Smith has been the model, as has Oracene Price, the Williams mother, of how to do things right. And so I applaud it all, and I'm glad Sloane paid tribute to her.
By the way, I don't think that women's tennis could have picked a better recipient, somebody that can represent the game in the future than Sloane. I mean, she seems like an absolutely perfect athlete to market the sport.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was actually in the corporate suites quite a bit because, with sometimes some of the bigger names couldn't do their corporate appearances, so I would substitute. And it was interesting to hear the corporate response, the fan response to Sloane. And of course, she's so charismatic off court. We talked about that for how many over a year now, Greg. How charismatic she is. She's great with the kids. She's great with the sponsors and all those off court events and promoting it. But she has a great smile. She's so attractive. She's a very pretty girl. And she's been doing all these appearances around New York and just so put together. So she does have the whole package. The question is now, can she take this and run with it? And I think that the good news is that, as we mentioned, she does have the pieces in place. She's got the boyfriend, Josie Altidore, who actually he had to play an MLS match up in Toronto. And he had been there all the fortnight with her, and then had to leave for the final to go play his own, as a professional athlete. And so he heard about at halftime that she had won, and was obviously very excited. But he was very encouraging of Sloane for this whole process. He really kept her on her toes. But I give most credit to Kamau Murray, because this was the coach who was able to finally connect with Sloane. And we've talked about this too, Greg, about how you can have the greatest coach in the entire world, but if he can't, or he or she can't talk the talk with the player and, give them information they can process, it doesn't matter. And Murray was really able to connect with Sloane. And it was interesting, when Sloane could not play, he still had her come to Chicago to see his kids' camps and be a part of that, and get her input and keep her involved, and show her how lucky she was to have her career, because all these other little kids just would wish to be her. And he was a guy who, he was coaching Taylor Townsend on the way to a tournament, And I think as the story goes, he had this massive stroke. He's not old at all. He's a young guy. He's much younger than me, and he had a massive stroke and obviously got through it. But I think that type of life experience, Greg, has given him a big picture perspective that has also helped Sloan put things in perspective and let her put things in a place that she can really manage them, including this career. Because obviously the first time around, after she had beaten Serena at the Australian, things did not go so well. So I think that hopefully she is more mature and better equipped and with a better team to really be able to handle it.
Now, what do you think happened to Madison in the final? Was her blitzkrieg on Coco in the semis a big negative for her going into that match, especially considering the huge match that Sloan had? I mean, like we just talked about it. I mean, best match for her to have ever survived, the gut check, everything, and to come out of that, she was prepared. Maybe Madison wasn't, based on how she just destroyed Coco. I mean, why do you think Madison wasn't ready for that final?
Well, first of all, let's give Madison credit for getting through a lot of three-set battles. She was down 4-2 in the third to Svitolina, who was going for the number one ranking, as we know in that tournament, and was one of the hottest players this summer, and was able to come back and prevail. So Madison, let me tell you, Madison had me there late at night because she had all the night matches. She had to deal with all the challenge of waiting around all day and so forth. So, and she proved that she can adjust and that she can be mature and dig her way out of the hole. And she learned, it was a much different Madison than I saw at the French Open and at Wimbledon, where when things started to go bad, she kind of waved the white flag. But not here, not the U.S. Open. She had won the title in Stanford, lost a heartbreaker to Muguruza in Cincinnati, who she had never lost to. And so she came into the U.S. Open. We really weren't sure what mood she was going to be in. But credit to Madison and Lindsay for being able to turn things around so quickly into such a positive direction and get her really geared up for this fortnight. And she played, let me tell you, she battled really beautifully, Greg. I mean, I don't think she played her best tennis in the first few rounds. I thought she played her best tennis against Svitolina to pull that one out. But what happened was, Coco, as we mentioned, we thought she would run through Coco. She'd already done so twice during the summer. But against Sloan, she was finally facing an opponent, as Lindsay Davenport commented, that was completely different. As she was a counterpuncher, Sloan could move, best wheels on the tour. And we gave her, just mix up the pace. And for Madison, who had all the pressure on her, she was supposed to win. She's the higher ranked player. All the expectations were on Madison to have her first Grand Slam first. And so I don't think that she really handled that pressure very well, quite frankly. And when Madison is off, we've talked about when Madison is on, it's scary good. But when Madison is off, it's scary bad. And she was off. She couldn't get the first serve in. She was having trouble with the forehand. Now, I will say, against Coco, she did call for the trainer. I think it was a set in 4-1, had that leg strapped. To some, it really wasn't that important. But I think Sloan seemed to know there was something going on because it is very unusual to play the Madison forehand, which is what Sloan did. She really went at that forehand side. And usually when you do that against Maddie, you end up eating the ball a lot. So it didn't happen in the final. She was not able to hit the winners and get into the position she needed. And so the unforced errors just piled up. And once we talked about once she gets on momentum, she's just hard to beat. She's a front runner. But once she starts losing like that, it's hard to stop the train too. And she just went down fast.
So where does Coco go from here? Now, at the beginning of the season, she talked about wanting to make one Grand Slam semifinal, correct?
Right.
And then she made two. So I guess that's good as long as next year she improves upon that. So in essence, she definitely achieved her goals, but now she has to raise the bar next year.
Well, I think Coco's in the right direction. She likes Pat Cash, her coach. She's the real jock of the three. She walks on there like a jock. She approaches her tennis like a jock. And so, for her, it's very important for her to have a game plan. I think she's going to have to start having a little bit more diversity. She's going to have to be able to change direction on the ground. She's getting a little bit predictable, just hitting cross court. The fitness can continue to improve. She's done well this summer with Pat, but that can get better. And I think it's also how to, again, dig yourself out of a hole when you get into it. And it's the thinking, the agility and the thinking. Look, Coco is now 16 in the world. Sloan is 17. Madison is 12. Venus is number 5 in the world. So we got 4 Americans in the top 20. And quite frankly, all 4 of them could be in the top 10 at some point. So the future is very bright. And along the lines of the fact you had 2 American girls in the junior final, and you have, Jennifer Brady and Cece Bellis and Kayla Day and all these other girls. And we have to give a shout out to Francesca Di Lorenzo, who is coached by a friend of mine, a former player, Ann Grossman. She won the collegiate title. And so she's with the Buckeyes, and it's so great the USTA is also highlighting collegiate tennis and making that important. And so I think she now will get a wild card into the qualifying next year. So we have a lot of talent, and it's all being developed. I think Coco, she's such a pretty girl. Again, she's got the whole package, and it's just a question, I think, of maturity with her, really. And hopefully this English mental coach who she has will help her with that, because she seems to be a little bit the youngest to me. When I hear her in her post-match, Greg, even though she's going to be 26, she seems more 16. So, I think that the jock mentality with her will take her, a bit to mature, but she's on the right way.
Yeah, I mean, she does act like in a way that I guess she feels like she has to ham it up.
She comes from a long line of jocks. We've mentioned her uncle Kiki Vandeweghe, of course, her grandfather, in the NBA, her mother, an Olympic volleyball player as well as a swimmer. So the genes are there. Her grandmother was a Miss America. So lots of accolades, lots of success, from all members of the family. So there are a lot of expectations on Coco. She said that she was never raised to be, we're not going to see the feminine, tender, I think that was her word, type of disposition on court. She is definitely thriving in this jock mold. But along that line is she has to also learn that you do need to add to your game some sort of diversity, some sort of other shot besides just a hard topspin, ground stroke.
Yeah, I mean, if she actually starts to win like big matches, her appearance, the way that she handles herself, she could be pretty intimidating. But
well, she did beat Pliskova, who was the number 1 seed. So she has had big wins. In fact, she's beaten 2 of the number 1 players. She beat Muguruza at the Australian, which is a big deal. And she also had a great Wimbledon, even though she did lose to Rybakova in the quarters. She did get to the quarters. I think she beat Wozniacki. So she's had big wins. So she loves those big moments. It's just a question of being able to do it again so that eventually you win the title. Yeah, and that's the whole difference in a Grand Slam and even a tournament, is that you have to be able to go the full distance. And to get that $3.7 million, Greg, did you see Sloan's face on that one?
Yeah, it's a lot of money, no question about it. So
it's a lot. I'll tell you, that's a lot of money. I don't know how it got to $3.7 million, but I mean, that is a lot of money. Yeah. And, it's interesting because Sloan also, of course, a lot of people have written her off, even before the injury, because they felt she wasn't a fighter. Her ranking had dropped out of the top 30. She was losing matches she shouldn't lose. And even though she had won a few titles, I think actually 4, and she, by the way, I think she's 5-0 in finals. When she gets to a final, she's tough. She knows how to close it out. But, she'd also had a string of first-round losses that were really surprising coming from someone of her caliber. And, it's funny because Under Armour refused to make her a new dress for this U.S. Open. They refused to make her a new dress for the U.S. Open Series. They said, you know what, you can wear the dresses we made you last year when you pulled out of everything and didn't play, and we're not making you anything new. And when she wasn't given really the prime match times or practice courts and all that, all these things I think started to parlay with Sloan. Of course, me as her, as you know, as her, strident supporter, I hear these things and my knee-jerk reaction is to go right to the mat for her. But when I saw Kamal in Washington at the tournament in D.C., I kind of got the sense that this was a process he wanted Sloan to go through, and so that it would create a real motivation and desire in her to really show people that she was right there and she was coming back and she's coming back strong. And so I do think all these snubs may have created that type of motivation in her. Contracts come up, money goes, and now all of a sudden you really want it. All of a sudden you're hungry. And I think that did factor into this whole meteoric rise in a matter of months to now this Grand Slam title.
All right. So Muguruza right now is number one, but that doesn't mean...
For the minute.
Yeah, that doesn't mean she's...
I had it for a few weeks. Now we have Muguruza.
and that doesn't mean that she's going to win Player of the Year, because we still have a couple of big events left that should decide it. You got Beijing at the end of the month, and then you've got Singapore at the end of October. So those two big...
But Singapore is the championship. So that's the WTA championships. That you have to qualify for. It's the top 8 girls. So right now, obviously, Sloan and Coco are right now not eligible for that event. Obviously, Venus is and Muguruza is.
Well, you're not going to be able to win Player of the Year if you don't go to that event, though.
Well, you have to qualify for it, and that means you have to get the points.
Yeah.
And so, that's why right now, to me, I think, Venus has had the most consistent record. Yes, she has not won a Grand Slam, so Muguruza's in the running, but she has won more Grand Slam matches than any other player on tour. And to me, that consistency overall, it'll be interesting to see. We'll have to see. But you're right. They have a couple of big events coming up. There's more matches to play. I don't think Venus will ever be ranked number one. As we talked about, mathematically, it's too tough for her because she's not going to play the same number of events. In fact, I looked at the player records. Most of the top 10 players have played at this point in the mid-20s, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 tournaments. Venus is still at 17 or 18. So she has not had any of the opportunity to accumulate the points that the other girls have, because she just, at 37 years of age, is not going to play the same schedule. But if you look at the quality of her results, right now, I think she has so much to feel proud about.
Could the tour have ever imagined to have this much success at the U.S. Open without having Serena, Vika, or Maria Sharapova in the second week?
Well, I think that's great news for them. As we talked, also, what I think is so important about seeing these American women in the semis and the feeling I got in these corporate suites is that we need to have American heroes. We need to have players who are winning. That not only attracts the younger generations in this, net generation campaign the USTA is running for kids, but and not only attracts the kids, it attracts corporate America. They want to get on board. They want to be attached to these, positive role models. They, because they sell. And, when you see Sloan with the, charismatic, pretty appearance with the smile, I mean, my goodness, this is something corporate America is going to jump on. And there is no question, to grow this game, you need your American market behind you. You need that push from your American market. We need to see more players that will create more events, that will create more fans. It's all a chain link reaction. And so this is the start. And I hope it does. I hope it breeds a lot more sponsorship, which will bring more events, which will bring more fans, which will bring more kids into the game, which will bring more champions. And so there's a much bigger picture for the success of this U.S. Open with this American tour.
And also, what was important to note out of these 2 weeks was that the WTA tour, the women, absolutely dominated the spotlight over the men, and it wasn't even close. And it wasn't because the men aren't there. It's not that they don't have marketable players. It's just that, and of course Rafa's a marketable player, but it's like we've seen that rodeo 1,000 times. It's that all the other younger men, the next gen stars that we talked about the last 2 weeks that were a major disappointment, none of them showed up at this event. None of them played well. You had all the stars that didn't even make it, Murray and Djokovic and such. So it just was not. I mean, thank goodness the women didn't have that type of 2 weeks, because this would have been a terrible Open. But
well, I think the women have overshadowed the men, with the exception of Roger. I think they've overshadowed the men in all the Grand Slams, quite frankly. Let's not forget Serena how many weeks pregnant beating Venus, and then of course the win from Ostapenko I thought was absolutely the highlight of the French Open. And then to have Venus and Muguruza in the final was, quite the match. And the women's matches in general at Wimbledon far overshadowed the men's because, quite frankly, Rafa Nadal won the U.S. Open without having to beat anyone in the top 20. And look, that's not his fault.
I know. It's crazy.
And but that was just the way it was. And he glided through the draw, never really had a battle, didn't really play his best tennis. But that was okay. You know what? He showed up, and that's why we give him credit, because one thing about Rafa is he always punches in his card. He always gives 150% effort. And he was there. He was professional. He dealt with the things he didn't like. He overcame those things, and he has kept loyal to his team with Carlos Moya and, of course, his uncle, Tony Nadal. It's very nice, Greg, after the ceremony in the press room, they gave both coaches, Tony Nadal and Kemal Murray, trophies as well. And they presented them with trophies as well, which I thought was a nice touch because these coaches go through so much. But he didn't have to beat anyone in the top 20, beat Kevin Anderson in the final. Credit to Kevin. He took advantage of a draw that was depleted by the fact Andy Murray really did not do the right thing and not pulling out before the draw was made, and instead did it afterwards. And that unfortunately left a very lopsided draw with no one in that bottom half. And, of course, Roger and Rafa in the top half. And that was a no-no from Andy Murray. He screwed it up. And then, of course, Sasha Zverev, who was the remaining top seed, was, as you said, not able to produce, losing to Borna Coric and Contemporary, and just did not show the physical wherewithal to go 3 out of 5, as we've been discussing. So, Kyrgios, Sasha Zverev, Jack Sock, these guys, Dimitrov was another one who really underperformed. All these guys who we've had great expectations for are still obviously a work in progress, and so we'll have to see what happens. I see Kyrgios on a luggage rack sitting in the lobby of the hotel at midnight in his sneakers and warm-up suit. So we don't know where these guys are, and I still think they're trying to figure it out. What's the right balance? But it did not help that 5 of the top men were not there, and Wawrinka, Raonic, Nishikori, of course, Novak, Andy, and Stan. And it's interesting, Greg, because the big talk at the U.S. Open off court was the fact these guys want to add a World Cup event at the beginning of the year just before the Australian, leading into the Australian. And you wonder why these guys want to add an event which will take away their Christmas vacation when they can't even post for the events they already have. And they're already complaining about the schedule they already have. And so you wonder what the thinking is here. What are the priorities and what's the takeaway from this?
Well, do you think how important is it for the players and Roger Federer obviously has been the instrumental voice here, and he doesn't really care about being number one anymore. He knows he's the greatest player maybe that ever lived, so he's looking at other ways to preoccupy his career and to make a name for himself when he's no longer playing and say, look, hey, you know what? Look at this event that I helped create. When he's 10, 15 years from now. So maybe that's part of it too, because some of that's we've talked a lot about how there's got to be, especially with Federer, proving to a lot of the other players, a lot of the men, that you know what, you don't have to play all year. Just make sure that you play enough to win the big ones, and maybe some of the other younger players will start acting that way as well.
Well, as you mentioned, he's been kind of the pioneer and is spearheading a lot of different initiatives. But he's 5, 6, 7 years older than these other guys like Novak and Andy and Rafa and the younger ones. And so he's at a different stage in his career, so he can afford to do this.
Yeah.
Yes, he has the Laver Cup coming up in a couple weeks. That's the event he created with his manager, Tony Godsick. Everyone's very excited about it. They're going to have a great field. It was formatted after kind of a Ryder Cup idea. But you're right. Novak and Andy and Rafa said, "Hey, we want to be a part of an event too. We want to have some investment. We don't want Roger getting the heads up on us, not only on court but off court as well." So they were trying to follow it. But I don't think this is probably going to be the right way, considering the fact they can't even make the matches and the tournaments they have on their schedule as it is, including the Grand Slams. I mean, $3.7 million, Greg, to win a Grand Slam is a lot of money. And I can only imagine what's going to happen if they have a World Cup team event for a couple weeks leading into the Australian. What shape these guys are going to be in by the time they get to Melbourne. That's an interesting point, though, is that everyone is trying to do what Roger does. And Roger, obviously had a disappointing U.S. Open. He had the back injury going in. Things just, it's amazing how things can flip on a dime. He's in Montreal playing the Canadian. Rafa loses to Shapovalov, and Roger says, look, he had the door open to grab the number one, and now he's lost to this teenager. And within 24 hours, Roger had a back injury, ultimately ended up losing to Zverev in the final, couldn't play Cincinnati, and was, really handicapped for the U.S. Open. Barely got through the first two matches, 5 sets. And we thought he had turned the corner, but against Delpo, as he said himself, knew he wasn't ready for Rafa and kind of just took a dive. But he was with Bill Gates the next day, Greg. He was lunching with Bill Gates at Bilbo K.
Is there
they were Hanuman. And so he doesn't waste a lot of time. He doesn't dally on the negative. He moves forward, and he moves quickly. And so he was with Bill Gates the next day and on to the next project. But I think the takeaway for the other guys is worry about yourself. Figure out what the right solution is for yourself, and stop looking at Roger.
Now, the Grand Slams are obviously more important than being ranked number one. So the question then is,
that could be one interpretation. I don't think the tours feel that way, but that's okay.
Sure, but you're a player. What would you rather have, Grand Slam titles or be ranked number one?
Well, usually the Grand Slam titles lead to be ranked number one.
Sure,
so
that helps.
If you win your Grand Slam titles, you're going to get there.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's a good bet. But that's basically what happened to Muguruza. She had a very disappointing year until she got to Wimbledon, quite frankly, and won Wimbledon, and now is number one. That would not have happened if she had not won Wimbledon. So that's the process, the usual process. Obviously, I think one of the takeaways will be, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but the takeaways are that both Rafa, Roger, Madison, and Sloan all had significant time off from the tour. So by the time they got to playing, they were fresh, and everyone else was worn out, especially with the girls this summer. Both Madison and Sloan were not able to play until the later part, really, of the spring and summer. And so they were fresh as a daisy, whereas Pliskova, Halep, Svitolina, Wozniacki were all pretty much worn out. And so there is something to be said, I'm hearing from the players, that they took great notice of the fact that taking off time is no longer a bad thing. And we'll have to see, we've seen now Novak and Andy filing Rogers' suit and taking off the rest of the year, presumably. Novak did have his wife had a baby girl, Tara, so that was done. And, of course, Andy's expecting his second child. But Andy is pulled out of everything in the fall, does not expect to play the rest of the year. So they're all kind of following suit, I think, with this idea that taking off time can prolong your career, not hurt it.
Now, what would happen? How would the tours react if all of a sudden the players decided, hey, you know what? I'm just not going to play the schedule I played. I don't care if my ranking goes down.
Funny you should mention that.
And why is that?
I think they are dealing with a little bit of that. I think that both tours are dealing with a little bit of that. And it's a tricky course. Because I will say, and this is different from when I played, I was talking to Chrissy Everett about it, who, by the way, did an incredible job at ESPN. She was absolutely spot on. But, when we played, we had the whole segment of Virginia Slim's, tournaments in the United States. We were in the United States a good 40% of the year.
Yeah.
We were not going from one continent to the next, from one part of the globe to the next, like these girls are. So the travel is much different now. And, the question is it too much? What's the best schedule? How can we make it more conducive for both, all the constituents of the game, men and women's tour? And, that's always the age-old question. Of course, the Grand Slams have become the centerpiece for global attention for the sport. No question about it. And as I was talking to John Wertheim, who works, writes for SI, also on Tennis Channel, he agrees, these Grand Slams are the only thing that really, attracts that spotlight on all levels, marketing, sponsorship, fans, everything. So it's one of those things where, when the tours have to deal with, now they go to Asia, quite frankly. And do you think anyone over here is going to be able to follow the events in Asia? Very tough with the time change. So, but of course, Asia loves to play tennis too. So it's one of those things where it's a much more complicated scenario.
Well, look, I mean, I still think as somebody that hasn't followed it obviously like you have, and been part of it your whole life, knowing even more how a novice fan might feel, the easiest remedy or the thing that of course that matters the most, and we've talked a lot about that for the past year, is scheduling and coverage. And it's very difficult for the novice fan to kind of follow sometimes in between all the Grand Slams, where it's a lot easier when at least you kind of get the 1,000 series events. That's okay because a lot of the top players are going to be there. It's almost like a mini slam, and those can be followed, but there's not enough of them. And I think that's kind of the problem, is that you get these players.
The problem is that it's been hard to put them all in one package because you have so many different entities, so many different agendas, self-interest groups that are all trying to jockey for their own little territory, that no one wants to give up anything for the greater good. And so that's what happens. You have a very you have a very discombobulated schedule all over the place where it's hard for the public to follow. But look, the idea is, going forward is that each tour has their final or their championships, ATP in London, as you mentioned, the WTA in Singapore. And you just have to follow the points now on the leaderboard to see who will reach those and end up the year at the, top spots. We should mention Del Potro, who got to the, who did so well to beat Roger and get to the semis. He moves to 24. Carreño Busta, who got to the semis, number 10 in the world. Anderson, who got to the final, number 15 in the world. And Shapovalov is number 51. And he, of course, is the bright light for the ATP. You talked about some of the guys underperforming, but Dennis really is one of those incredibly just enthusiastic, invigorating young kids, teenage kids who we look forward to seeing. And by the way, he tweeted out to Sloan, "I'm sending the champagne bottle to you." And this time I'm going to get it right. So lots of tweets. Oracene Williams tweeted to Sloan after she beat Venus. Congratulations, very gracious of her. So, we've seen a lot of really generous responses from a lot of the top players, including Serena Williams, by the way, who after Sloan won tweeted out in a very long tweet, it was 3 different parts, how proud she was to see both Sloan and Madison there in the final, and how happy she was for them. And that takes a lot of guts too, because obviously her sister lost in the semis, but she had the grace to as the as obviously the goat of the whole group to step aside and applaud their spotlight.
What happens right now for the Fed Cup final for the U.S.? What do you think happens there? Interesting.
Well, it can be either really good or really challenging. The question really for that match is what's going to happen with Vika Azarenka. Obviously, you could have any combination of any of these girls, along with you have Shelby Rogers and you have, of course, Bethany Maddock obviously will be out because of this injury. She was all over the place, though. That didn't stop her from the commentating and all the other things she was doing. Very, very energetic, but she will not be able to play doubles. So, but you have Coco, Madison, Sloan. Even if they all can't go, any combination of them should be enough to prevail in that match if Vika is not playing. If Vika plays, it adds a twist to the whole story because, of course, Vika would be considered the favorite in her singles, although she hasn't played a lot. She's had no matches since Wimbledon. We know she's training with Michael Joyce as she endures this custody battle for her son Leo with her ex-boyfriend. But we're told that may go through, to October or later in this month. And to that degree, she has to be in LA. She cannot leave LA until the custody is resolved. And that's why she cannot play the U.S. Open. So I don't know where she stands on that. My guess is she'll try and go because she's very dedicated to her country. She even tweeted out, her last tweet yesterday was, celebrating the anniversary of her country's, anniversary. So she was, she's very patriotic, and I'm sure she would love to represent her country in Fed Cup. I think it's going to be a real technical thing with this custody, though. So we don't know. And that if she's not in it, I think Kathy Rinaldi, Fed Cup captain Kathy Rinaldi, has a great decision to make.
Okay, yeah, because we.
And you know what? Again, again, Greg, this is so important. Fed Cup is so important. Why, it seems like such a little event, but it's
Sure.
so important in the landscape of American tennis. Again, creating heroes, bringing attention to the U.S. audience, so that if they win this title for the first time in 17 years, they can go back home and, again, as the champions, and that will just breed itself into next year. And, again, creating enthusiasm amongst youngsters for the game.
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty confident we're going to see Coco there again. So the question is that with the WTA finals and the possibility that either Keys or Sloan may not make it, it's possible that they may not make it. That one of them probably says, "Hey, I got a 3-week break. I might as well go ahead and play in the Fed Cup."
I hope so. I hope they both play. I think they both would get a lot out of it. They've played before. They've never won a title. There's a big difference. I was very fortunate one year to play with Chrissy and Martina. Not a bad team to be a part of. And I was very much the supporting act, and even was the coach on court for both of them because there was a void to be filled. And I certainly, let me tell you, I learned so much, and I was so grateful for that experience. And of course, because of Chrissy and Martina, we won. And I say we very fortunately, really, but I still have the picture. I still have the memories. And the bottom line is I hope that, for Sloan and Madison and Coco, that they have that experience as well, because it is just one of those incredible things you always want to have on your career record. And that's why Roger Federer and Andy Murray, absolutely went right to the mat, fought so hard for their Davis Cup title because they knew your career is never complete until you have that title, that team title. It's the only team event, and it's just so important. Look, you see these girls are able to get along off court, so we're not looking at ego issues and that sort of thing. And I think with the fact that Kathy Rinaldi was appointed this year has just made the world of difference in the level of commitment and dedication and investment that both sides, the players and the USTA, make for this. And she really cares. One thing about players are they can see right through people. And they know when someone's just punching in their card, trying to make their numbers to pick up their bonus check. And they know when someone really cares and really has the passion and commitment to really providing the highest standard for the event. And that's Kathy Rinaldi, Martin Blackman, of course. And, and of course, Stacey Allister, who's running pro tennis. They all have really made that investment to try and help and elevate these events. So, now, I mean, what better timing can you have than to have Coco, Sloan, and Madison now playing so well? And this wasn't even the team that got them to the final, by the way. You had Allison Risk and Shelby Rogers and lots of girls. So, and Cece Bellis, of course, is in the periphery. So, it's just a nice decision to have.
Okay, a few minutes left to go on the show. The roof situation was there was some controversy last year, and I guess except for Nadal, was there any controversy as far as the roof at the Open? And I guess they have another one coming soon, right?
Well, as you know, I practically lived in the stands watching almost every match. All I can tell you is the iced coffee is great, and those U.S. Open drinks at night were phenomenal. And I will tell you, I don't know whether it was the drinks or what, but the roof was fine to me. I thought the roof was just great. I thought they tweaked it, they improved it. There was no issue really with the ventilation. Last year it got a little warm sometimes. There was a lot of issue with noise. I don't know what they did to improve it, but it was definitely improved. They definitely had addressed the issues. And of course they have Armstrong, the new Armstrong that's being built next door with a second roof. So that should be done by next year. That's good news. Everyone loved the new grandstand. That was a big favorite because you didn't need tickets. You could pretty much anyone could get in there. I thought the USTA did a great job. I have to tell you, it's always nice when everyone's very solution oriented and they are looking to resolve things, and the small gestures make such a big deal to the players. Of course, this was the one Grand Slam the players had most criticism of, and not this year so much. And I think that's because they didn't have to make any Sophie choices over who to credential in their family, and it was always these little things always become so stressful. And it was just nice this year where, for some reason, the solutions were made, and people really were able to focus on what was important and doing their job and doing their work on and off court. And there was a lot that went on off court as well. I mean, let me tell you, Greg, I practically lived there for 2 weeks on the outskirts, at all those courts, and they had, of course, all the different restaurants and all the different entertainment there, and it was just a great venue, something for everyone. So they've made it a real all well-rounded experience for a very sophisticated New York crowd, and I had many friends, obviously, in New York, because I used to live there for 15 years while I was on tour. So it was nice to see them having a good time. And enjoying all of it, whether they had the Rafa Roger match or not, it was still okay.
All right, we talked about the women and what to look forward to on the WTA Tour the rest of the season. As far as the men, the Davis Cup semis start Friday, so it's Belgium and Australia, France and Serbia. They're both going to be on clay, and we're going to have some absentees there as well. Right.
We don't expect Novak to play, and that was, of course, he wanted that Davis Cup title. This was a big year for him to go for it, and he had played in the first couple rounds, so that's a big disappointment for them. I'd have to put them now as the underdog against France, who has, Monfils, Tsonga.
They got a good team.
A number of players who are playing pretty well. Puy, of course, he did well at the Open. But to me, the most curious match will be with Australia. And, of course, the Australian press has absolutely ridiculed Kyrgios. They have condemned him. Even when he got to the final in Cincinnati before this, they were, again, critical of him. And I felt like, I remember saying to you, Greg, what's going to happen if this guy leads the Australian team to the Davis Cup title this year? Then what are the Australian press going to say?
I mean, wasn't he like the king of Australia in the previous round?
Exactly. He helped beat the United States.
Yeah.
He was. Granted, Jordan Thompson got the win over Sock to start the things off, but he was the one who came through, and it was just absolutely an incredible moment when they won, and I think it was perhaps Nick's highlight of the year.
Yeah.
And everyone, Leighton Hewitt, he's the captain, and of course the former number one, and he just also, here you go, the right guy for Kyrgios. Kyrgios listens to him, respects him, and he was right there for Kyrgios every single second, in his face, really getting him up, really boosting his spirits and getting focus on the match, because Kyrgios got nervous. And it'll be interesting to see if Kyrgios can keep his calm. He'll have Goffin, and so it's not going to be a slam dunk for Australia. But I would just wonder if Kyrgios is saying to himself, I wonder if Tomic and I come in here and we win this, then what are they going to say?
Yeah, that.
And he's the type of guy who loves to prove people wrong.
Sure.
Now the question is, what kind of fitness is he in? I don't think I saw him on the practice court too much.
All right, so after the semis of the Davis Cup, which is coming up on Friday, you've got Shanghai on October 8th. That's the next big ATP event. And then you've got Paris, the Rolex Masters. That's the end of October. And then you got the next gen ATP finals early November, followed by the ATP finals, the Nitto ATP finals the week after.
And we should talk, and we also want to mention Milan, the next gen final Milan. Roger's already said he's going to play Shanghai and Paris. He's going to also obviously play in Basel, home country. So he has set his schedule, and obviously has qualified already for London. So that's his schedule. He tends to stick with it. It's indoors. It should favor him. Rafa will probably maybe play. I don't know if he's going to play one more or not, because they both have this Labour Cup in a couple weeks. So that's also another event on their schedule. But I think we're going to see Roger. We'll see a fight for number one at the end, although Rafa is quite a bit ahead in points at this stage. And you know what? Roger's going to have a tough time with that number one now, because he's going to have so many points to defend next year in the beginning, right up through Wimbledon, that Rafa may sit at that top perch for quite a while, unless Novak and Murray come back with something special. But you know what? If Rafa ends the year at number one, it's well deserved. I still have to say, though, I do give the edge as far as the GOAT's concerned to Roger, because he still holds the head-to-head over Rafa. But what a great rivalry we've seen this year from those two guys.
All right, now before I let you go, this movie looks pretty interesting. The more clips I see, the Billie Jean King movie, the Bobby Riggs movie. By the way, they couldn't have picked a better actor to play Bobby Riggs. That was especially considering everything. Now, I was too young to really understand any of this stuff. I mean,
how old are you?
I'm 48. but I was
Okay.
just when did that take place? Early 70s?
Yeah, I was 9. I think I was 9 years old, and I watched every single second of it, and I was
Oh,
so
I'm sure
thrilled
you
when Billie
did.
Jean won. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I was just loving every minute of it. Of course, I had no idea at that point the ramifications of everything, but I just knew it was, I am woman, hear me roar type of, a win for us.
No, it was.
But I think all my all the girls who the juniors, we were all
Mhm.
so happy to see Billie Jean win, and of course, it has far more meaning now. But the movie is great. I saw the movie. They gave a prelim to all the players at various different stops on the tour. So I saw it. It's a terrific movie. She's going out to LA this weekend for the premiere there. Billie's been to Toronto and Telluride for the premieres there. They of course celebrated her and Emma Stone at the women's final. And so it's very exciting, and I'm glad they highlighted this very monumental occasion, not just for tennis, obviously, but women's rights and equality overall for everyone. And it's a good message to send, and I'm glad they did it so well.
Yeah, to me, and since you've seen it, one of the things that intrigues me about it is that the outsider pretty much only, especially people who were young at that time, okay, it's a battle of the sexes, man against women, women wins, and okay, and what it does for women, all right, but there's a lot more to the match and how it took place and everything behind the scenes. That's history. Those are all the kind of things that intrigue me of how they actually put this together.
Well, you'll like the movie then, because it actually goes into a lot of detail I didn't even know, quite frankly. I mean, obviously I knew about the match and I knew a little bit about Billie, but it goes into a lot of detail as to the whole thing with Bobby Riggs. Of course, he's quite a character, and it was far more. There was far more layers than you would expect, which is why the movie is pretty good. I like the movie. I think you'll like it. I think it's gonna be very successful.
Okay, so that is going to wrap things up. So, by the way,
still don't know Serena's baby's name, but I'm sure that will come.
Okay.
I know you're on the edge of your seat, Greg.
Yeah, I'm not a woman, so it's the guys. When it comes to women and pregnancy and naming kids, and it is what it is. It is going to be a very interesting thing to see what happens to Serena though when she comes back and decides to go up against this new wave of tennis players. So it's going to be nice.
All I can say is God help the girls who have to face her in that first tournament. I think she's going to come back like a whirlwind, an absolute whirlwind. I think for her to have to sit here and watch this month after month has just created such desire and hunger for her to come back. I think it's going to be great because the challenge obviously will be to get back into shape and back into form, which is after you've had a baby and she's 36 is a lot tougher than you think.
Yeah, sure.
But as her coach Patrick Mouratoglou said, he's ready. He's got the practice partners to go, and she's gung ho. I'm sure she's already training a little bit now. But I think it's gonna be great if we have everyone there, all generations, all levels of players, and Vika, Maria, and of course Serena, Venus. I think it'll be fantastic. Because I only think we're going to have that for a short time.
No, that's true. Time is running out. She can't be playing tennis forever. Because you got to believe that for Serena, especially now with the family, that she's probably got she's got the Grand Slam goals that she wants to accomplish, and when she does,
she wants 2 more titles.
2 more.
She wants to break that record, Margaret Court's record, and she'll get that. And
you think that's it then? You think she gets it? That's it? Then she goes, okay.
I would think so.
Okay.
I don't think we're gonna. I think at 36 years of age with a baby, I think she'll have. You never know. I mean, who would have thought Roger Federer would have come back and had the success he did? But she's going to have to watch her health and injuries and all that sort of thing, because that's the real issue when you get older. When you turn that page at 30, it's all about keeping healthy and keeping the body injury free. So that to me is her biggest opponent, and if she can deal with that, 100% Serena is definitely the favorite.
All right, sounds good. Andrea, appreciate your time as always, and we'll talk to you next week.
Great, thanks a lot.
All right, so that'll wrap it up here for Prime Sports Tennis. Don't forget to check out all our PSN On-Demand shows within hours following each live broadcast on this website or on our iTunes or YouTube pages under Prime Sports Network. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN. And once again, thanks for tuning in to Prime Sports Tennis with Andrea Leand on the Prime Sports Radio Network.